I got another 1,000 years of church history to get through here. Since we're in New England, I just had to start this next segment off with one of your great writers and poets, Henry David Thoreau. And I just love this notion. We need the tonic of wildness, you know. And it's the same thing. I think that's what Mary Magdalene was after in that cave, you know, just going into the wilds, into the desert, into the cave. Mary Oliver, your other great poet from up here. Tell me, what is it you plan to do with your one wild and precious life? I taught a course at the Grunewald Guild several years ago called Illuminating the Word, and I team taught it, and the woman I taught with started each class off with either a scripture passage or a poem, and we did a Lectio Divina around it. Everybody had to share their favorite word or phrase. Then I took everybody over to the studio, and they had to visualize their favorite word or phrase. And this is mine from a poem called Summer, in which she talks about, there's a grasshopper up top there, but right in the line before this one, she has a grasshopper in her hand. And she said, tell me about grasshoppers, but not all grasshoppers, this one that I'm looking at. And it's a prayer to God, you know, and as all her poetry is, about being in nature on Cape Cod where she lives, but either walking the beach or the woods and experiencing the presence of God, and that's what leads us to prayer. And that's nothing new, is it? It's just that sometimes we have new voices to lead us to what we've known all along. We just lost touch with it. And I was being reminded by my new BFFs over here from St. Katharine Drexel Parish that today is the feast of St. Katharine Drexel. And I had her built in earlier and then took her out in the interest of time, but I thought, I'm going to get out of here alive. I better put her back in. So, of course, she was a Philly girl, and I grew up not far from her shrine, her mother house, which sadly is now closed, and the sisters have to move on, and her tomb, her body has been sent down to the cathedral in downtown Philly. Same thing happened with St. Mary Ann Cope in Syracuse. Her whole mother house is chained up and padlocked, and you can't get in it, and they've sent her body back to Hawaii. And the Shrine of the North American Martyrs, you know, it's just a new part of the new age we're in. I think people just don't have devotion to the idea of pilgrimage to visit saints anymore. And of course, I love it myself. So anyhow, Katharine Drexel was grew up in a debutante in a very, very wealthy family in Philadelphia, but she used her fortune and her inheritance to start the Sisters of the Blessed Sacrament to work with Native Americans and African Americans. This is back at the turn of the last century. And one of the sisters is here. That's why I'm really careful about what I'm saying. Make sure I got my facts right. But the night before the mother house opened, what was it, 1900 when that property opened, or roughly? 1891. 1891. Katharine was walking around with a policeman. It was the night before the official opening of it, and they found dynamite that the KKK had planted because they hated her, obviously, for the work that she had dedicated her life to. As a young woman of 18 or 19, she took a train ride out west and saw a Navajo reservation and the horrible, horrible conditions that Native Americans were living in. And then she learned about the horrible conditions of African Americans in the Deep South. And she, because of her privilege, met Pope Leo XIII face-to-face. She had a private audience with him when she did her European tour, which all refined young women did in those days. And she said, you got to do something about, send missionaries because the blacks and Indians need help. And he said, why don't you do it? So that's how she came to found the Sisters of the Blessed Sacrament. And but this is one of her lines. This is based on a photograph of her at the age of 18, and the painting was commissioned by St. Juan Diego High School in Salt Lake City, Utah. They have a library there, all glass, overlooking the Rocky Mountains. It's absolutely beautiful, and their library was dedicated to St. Katharine Drexel. So they commissioned this painting to hang there. I haven't been there lately. I don't know if she's still there or not. But anyhow, I based it on her photograph of her at the age of 18 so that she looked close in age to the students in this high school. And this is one of her quotes: respect others in heart and mind. If there's any prejudice in the mind, we must uproot it or it will pull us down. And here she is with the Native American boy, that's Jesus, but holding the monstrance close to her heart. That's why they're called the Sisters of the Blessed Sacrament. Around the border, it's cut out of this picture, but there's motifs from many different Native American tribes from around the United States just their patterns and whatnot. And you see the bottom right one is a train heading west. And that's a real feather in the band of the Navajo boy there on the left. Well, as you know, we're back to Philly again. And before the Pope came, I went around town sketching him in all our big tourist spots. And the biggest tourist spot is the top step of the art museum, that Rocky ran up. Day or night, there is always a busload of people either running up the step or posing next to the statue of him down at the bottom. Many of you have been there. Sadly, I don't think any of them ever go in the museum, but at least they get that far. So anyhow, I have the Pope there, and he's standing on what there are bronze footprints where Rocky stood. And so there he is cheering on the crowds. But I put the quote, I love the quote at top. It's what he said to youth in the Philippines when he was there. Have the courage to be happy. And in this day and age, with all the troubles that youth face, teenagers, young people, all the temptations, all the ways that they're being encouraged by our culture and society to go away from Jesus, he's saying it takes courage to be happy, and you're happy if you have faith in the risen Christ. That's where you should be moving. And I thought, what a beautiful twist on there. Never thought of happy being courageous before. So a couple months ago, back in the fall, a friend of mine from the West Coast, from the Grunwald Guild actually, Karen, came to Philly, and she had never been to the art museum, so we went there and spent good 2 hours inside the museum. Then we were coming out the front doors, and it's so hard, of course, to convey in a picture, but this was what we encountered, and it was just breathtaking. It's like everybody in the big plaza there just stopped and looked. It was like a moment, a flash of a moment, and what I think of as a thin place because of the lighting and the sky and everything. It was just beautiful weather. Everything was perfect. It was like God was hovering right over the city and with the light, and it was just one of those passing moments where you're aware of the cosmos and the Sacred Heart in a whole new way. And literally, people were just kind of, And so Karen said, do you think we're seeing this differently because we just spent 2 hours looking at beauty? And I thought, maybe, we were just trained to seek beauty in the midst of all the troubles. That was a Saturday afternoon, and there were 2 wedding parties there with the brides and bridesmaids taking their heels off at the bottom and running up the steps and standing at the top like Rocky. And I noticed that the groom and groomsmen were all at the bottom taking the pictures. They weren't the ones running up the steps, and then they all would have their wedding pictures. So it's really become a wonderful gathering place for the city now. But the reason I'm showing it, of course, is that moment, that flash of awareness, that just enough to say, all's well, and as scary as the world is, this is here too. Don't get caught up in the negative. And this is a more recent So this is the center of town now, of course. I love this line from Pope Francis. Try to think in this moment, with the disappointments and defeats that each one carries in the heart, that there is a God close to us who calls us by our name and says, arise, stop crying, because I have come to set you free. So here we are back in the boat. And we're going to look at Mary Magdalene. And despite the conversation I just had with someone at lunch, who's a Mary Magdalene scholar, and doesn't buy this whole French version of it, but in any event, this is a picture I did of Mary Magdalene on my iPad several years ago, and just for my morning meditations, but it ended up being a little psychedelic, didn't it? So it's like, I thought this should be on a hippie bus, an old Volkswagen bus. But it's Mary Magdalene. I have seen the Lord, and just everything bursting into life and light and color, just like Pope Francis just said in that quote, don't be afraid. And so my calendar this year, which I don't even know if they sent them, but you can get it online if you're interested. The theme is Saints and Critters. And this is for April, not only because Easter is in there, but it's the feast of Katharine of Siena, who had great devotion to Mary Magdalene. Mary Magdalene is the patron of the Dominicans because of her preaching ability, and they are, of course, the order of preachers. So Aquinas said, we should make her the patron of the community since she was the first preacher. She's called, from the early stages of the church, the apostle to the apostles. Here's Mary Magdalene. I went to India back in 1997 to our seminary in Bangalore for a month. A classmate of mine in the Albites was the novice director at the time, and he said, would you come over and do an art and prayer workshop for our novices? And he said, but come, we'll have it at the end of the month. Don't stay for less than a month because of the adjustments and the time it takes to travel. So it was a very special time. But on the way over, since it was right after Easter that year, I chose Mary Magdalene kind of as a traveling companion. And so this was on the way over to India, and she's sitting in front of the tomb, wrapped up in her own stuff. She doesn't even realize it's empty or doesn't know yet what's going to be going on inside that tomb, Often we would prefer to hang on to our security, to stand in front of a tomb. We are afraid of God's surprises. This is Pope Francis. God always surprises us. God's like that. Let us not be closed to the newness God wants to bring to us. So, of course, these paintings were done 20 years before there was such a thing as Pope Francis. But this is at the end of the tour. And look at the difference. And what this reflects is the difference in me from going over there full of kind of curiosity and what's this going to be. And I'd never been in a non-Western culture before, so that took a bit of adjustment. That's a whole other morning session. But by the end, I didn't want to leave. It was so awesome. And to see the connectedness beneath our faiths and what I learned from our Indian novices and Anthony DeMello and all these great who show the connection, and Thomas Merton, between our Western spirituality and teachings and the Hindu and Buddhist and the other part of the world. How beneath the surface we are all one. We're all created in the image and likeness of God. I even drew St. Francis de Sales dressed up in a guru's outfit, just to show. Because they learned things, and I'd say, Francis de Sales said that. It's just common sense spirituality. So here's Mary Magdalene at the tomb door. And in this painting, she's holding a bouquet of flowers to bring to the tomb. And a friend of mine, when I was painting, I lived in Washington, and I remember one of the guys stopping in the studio, and he said, tell me about this painting. And I told him it was Mary Magdalene, and she's standing at on Easter morning. And he said, and it's like we're getting Jesus' view. He's looking out from the tomb at her. I thought, that's neat. I said, yeah, of course, you get it. This is how I get all my ideas. And he said, and that bouquet, he said, it's like right in her womb. So this is really about new life. I said, of course. What am I, an idiot? I knew that. And he is a biologist, a scientist. So I thought, it's so neat how things come together. But anyhow, all these flowers were symbolic to Mary Magdalene in the Middle Ages. People always ask me how long it takes to do a painting, and it's not as long as you think. I do it all the time. I know my way around paint, or now the iPad. It's the research and the thinking. That's what takes much, much longer than once I start painting, that's nothing. But anyhow, so I did a lot of research, and all these flowers, we won't go into them here, but they were symbolic of Mary Magdalene in the Middle Ages. But in the center, the white flower is Jesus, fully bloomed and opened. But around it is a crown of thorns, hard to see in the projection here. But that was inspired by Francis de Sales, who said, if you want to enjoy the roses, you have to accept the thorns that come with them. That ain't that life, No free lunch, that's our way of saying it. So years ago, I was asked to do some large paintings for Sisters of Mercy High School, all-girls high school, just outside Philadelphia. And they built a new wing on their building, one of which was a chapel. And so they wanted 14 saints who exemplified the spiritual and corporal works of mercy. So this is the Mary Magdalene one. But the unique twist was Sister Gina, the principal at the time, set up salt horses, in the hallway. And these were begun right in the hallway so that the girls came out and helped paint them, the students. And every art class came out while I was there and helped paint. And then I took them back to Washington and did the facial features and fine-tuned the details and cleaned up any little messy stuff. But a large of what you saw, the backgrounds were all sponged on with gold paint that the girls did. And it was a wonderful way to bring them into the whole process. But they were learning so much that the art teacher decided to give them credit for doing this, but they had to write, and the theology teacher, senior theology teacher, had them write essays. And they sent them to me after it was over. And I remember the one girl said, we studied church history and the church has not been very kind to women over the centuries. She said, but when I learned about Teresa of Avila doing these paintings, I realized there are strong women models for me out there. And another girl said, I can't wait till I have a daughter of my own that I'm going to bring her here to school and show I painted Mary Magdalene's dress, that she wanted to pass it on to so it became a wonderful ongoing thing rather than just me painting something and shipping it off and all of a sudden there they are. It became part of the lifeblood of the place. Now don't ask me to paint with 15-year-old girls again, but inside, if you ever come to Philly, inside the museum is this painting I remember from the time I was a little kid. My dad used to bring me to the art museum. That's one of the reasons I love art so much. So to this day, when I need to run away from home for a day, I just hop on the train and go across, I'm 5 minutes from downtown Philly and go to the art museum. And that's my place. It's like going to a cathedral for me. Because not only does it flood back the memories of going there, loving it as a kid, but what it means to me now also. But this painting was there, and it's Mary Magdalene preaching the gospel. And I can distinctly remember my father, I said, she's a woman, how could she preach the gospel, give a sermon? And I think that's where I first learned the story of France. This is Mary Magdalene in France, bringing the gospel to Gaul. And you can see, it's hard to see, but instead of a pulpit in church, it's the branches of a tree creating a pulpit. So it's about preaching the word outside, and that creation is our church, and what a modern concept that is too. Huh? So here's Our Lady, Queen of the Apostles. And I have 4 different color apostles there, 2 different angels. But Mary Magdalene is rowing the boat because she is the apostle to the apostles. And as I said, she was also in the old church called the New Eve, just as Mary, the Mother of God, was. Mary Magdalene's called the New Eve because she was in the garden of the resurrection, just as Eve was in the garden of the fall. So it's the correlation. And for that reason, Mary Magdalene is the patron saint of gardeners. So from my children's book, Jesus A to Z, this is the letter D, diverse disciples directed by a divine dove to distant destinations. I don't want to get political, but if you can't make out what the Holy Spirit's saying, it's or Sweden. Sweden is okay. I was dying to post this that morning on my Facebook page, but I decided, as Mrs. Obama said, when they go low, we go high, and I didn't put this one in and put a different picture in, which got, by the way, 220,000 hits. The one I did put a black Madonna with the Hail Mary on it. Thomas Merton said, the gate of heaven is everywhere. This is a tabernacle that I saw last March, a year ago now, I guess. I went to Guatemala with Catholic Relief Services on a sketching tour for 1 week. And it was an eye-opening trip. I want to share some of that with you. But this was a tabernacle I saw in a chapel. And when I got home and translated it to my iPad, I decided to take the doors off the tabernacle and put the cosmos in there. Because I think that's what the trip meant more than anything to me, is this global reality of the world. And we're all in there, That's what the tabernacle is, in addition to housing the Eucharist. It's a beautiful symbol, but Vatican II has broken us out of that, I hope. I spoke in November at 2 times, the same talk twice, at the National Catholic Youth Conference in Indianapolis. And I had told the kids, I had 300 kids each time, and I told them, I know many of you are very into adoration before the Blessed Sacrament. And I said, that's a wonderful thing. I would never, ever discourage that, because you're going into your creative, quiet, contemplative space, and we all need to do that. I said, but it means nothing if you're not leaving that chapel and seeing the presence of Christ, not just in that host, but in the black kid or the gay kid or the Mexican kid, whoever. That's where you need to see Christ even more. It's nice and safe when you're in that cozy little room, but that's not enough, you know? And that's what this picture is about. The gate of heaven, it's everywhere. It's Therese knocking on the, you in there today? Yeah, of course you are, but you're also out here. It's God's everywhere. So I'm all about black elk these days. You know, the great Sioux Indian, Oglala Sioux, he wrote a biography that was written about him called Black Elk Speaks back in the 1930s. He was a mystic and a convert. And this past November at the bishops' conference, the bishops unanimously agreed to start advancing his cause to canonization. And he will be known as Nicholas Black Elk. Black Elk was his Sioux name. He was at Custer's Last Stand, and as a 15-year-old boy, scalped a white soldier at Custer's Last Stand, and then later was at Wounded Knee when the whites massacred hundreds of men and women and children, trying to run out of the village with their children in their arms, and the white soldiers were just slaughtering them. You know, it's not all the little John Wayne Western that is our reality. And he witnessed that as well. He married a Catholic woman and became Catholic himself and worked with the Jesuits in Red Cloud, an Indian reservation in South Dakota. He died in the 1950s. But he never abandoned Native American spiritual practices. He just saw them in conjunction with the Catholic practices that he learned to love. He didn't have to abandon anything. And that's what we see in the modern age. And what cosmic spirituality, it's not forcing people to drop one thing, that one's better than another. It's seeing the connectedness of all. He wrote a book that links the 7 sacraments with the 7 main principal teachings of Lakota Sioux life and spirituality. So the story has it that he was one day smoking his peace pipe. That was the chief ritual in the Sioux culture. And this is when he was an old man. And a Jesuit priest came by to visit him, who was also an old man, 80 years old. He had been a missionary in the Dakotas for 50 years. And the old priest walked in and saw Black Elk smoking his pipe and whipped it out of his hands and threw it out the window. He said, you've got to abandon these ways and adopt Christian practices. So Black Elk stood up and whipped this is his granddaughter sharing the story, whipped the office book out of the priest's hands and threw it out the window. And they both went out to retrieve their articles, and as they were bent over to pick them up, they caught each other's eye and just started laughing and shook hands. And I just love that beautiful story. It is, you know, the stuff we get. We make God so small, don't we? We have God all caught up in all the stuff that we humans do. God doesn't care about any of it, except that we're honoring each other, walking with each other, love, not all the nonsense that we affix to God. So here's Black Elk. The heart is a sanctuary at the center of which is a little space where the Great Spirit abides. Now, all Native Americans refer to the God as the Great Spirit, so it was an easy step to thinking of the Holy Spirit. Listen to what he wrote here. The first piece, which is the most important, is that which comes from the souls of people when they realize their relationship, their oneness with the universe and all its powers, and when they realize that at the center of the universe dwells the Great Spirit, and that this center is really everywhere. It is within each of us. This sounds like Teilhard de Chardin, doesn't it? Or any of the cosmic cosmologists that we read today. Thomas Berry, Elia de Leo, all of them. Find new ways to spread the word of God to every corner of the world. Pope Francis. So this is the new mission style since Vatican II. Up until now, it was missionaries meant go over and convert everybody, convert the world. Since Vatican II, not what missionaries do anymore. It's not about conversion. It's about feeding healing in hospitals and educating, no matter what their faith tradition is. You know, we don't do that because they're Catholic. We do it because we're Catholic, you know. There's a whole different way of looking for things. That's why we run Catholic schools. You know, it's not to make every kid become Catholic. It's to spread the teachings of Christ, you know. And so that's what a lot of people don't like, but that's what the Pope's talking about here. So on this trip, the focus of our Guatemala trip with Catholic Relief Services, it was youth, to see what CRS is doing with young people and in schools. And we visited this area, the Quiche, up in the mountains in the middle of Guatemala, where for a 30-year-old civil war raged, in which tens and tens of thousands of Mayan Indians were killed by the government. It was genocide. They were trying to wipe out the entire native population. So Sisters of Charity from New York went down there in 1991 to help people through PTSD and rebuild again after this horrible period. So that's one of the things we saw, and they started schools. Catholic Relief Services has, I forget how many schools, but all the little children were lined up to greet us, singing a song, and some of them were dressed in native costume. And they had a prayer service with an ancient Mayan mandala that they do on the ground with the same colors. And guess what? I learned the Sioux do this when I was at St. Joseph Indian School in December. The Sioux Indians do it too. So it's all this native tradition leading us to the land, using nature itself. When Mayan farmers, before they put a shovel in the dirt, they pray to Mother Earth, I'm sorry, I'm about to hurt you, you know, and ask her permission as they plant. And just this closeness to the earth and to creation. We visited a third grade classroom, and this woman who happened to be the principal of the school was teaching a lesson. She said to the little kids, third graders, did you ever hear of a woman running a car mechanic shop before? And they're like, no. And they said, well, that's what we're going to hear a story about. A little boy whose mother wanted to be an auto mechanic. And it was just a way to educate kids and break them out of their stereotypes in that culture, you know. And it was just fun because I was sitting there sketching, and all the kids, of course, were looking at that. I guess I disrupted class a little bit. But down the hall from that, the parents were cooking the lunch for the kids. There's 70% malnutrition for the children and they're so adorable. They're running and skipping and just like kids anywhere, and you just think, you don't know where your next meal's coming from. Yet, as children, they didn't show that, you know? So CRS is training these parents to cook the lunch meal. And for many of these kids, that's the only meal they get all day. But they're learning about nutrition and all that. So it's a really eye-opening trip. And I thought, even me in Camden, New Jersey, this was opening me up to how self-centered we are here in the States, and how that's not what the church is supposed to be about, you know? So Sister Ginny is her name, a New York charity, started this place called the Barbara Ford Peace Center, and it's in a beautiful complex. It's a thing a residence that she hopes to turn into a hotel, a cooking facility where she's training young people, aged 18 to 22, how to do work in the food industry, how to cook, how to manage a restaurant, and where their training is her dreams to make it a restaurant and make this whole thing a conference center. That people would come, and a very state-of-the-art conference room, you know. And so it was amazing to see all this, and it's all her doing. So they gave us a demonstration, all these young people, of the food they'd created, and I sketched, and then they run hairdressing and barber schools to give people a trade. The young woman on the upper right there, I had lunch with her, and she shared, we had translators, of course, but she shared that when she went through the program, she would leave her house at 4 o'clock in the morning, walk 1 hour in the dark to get to a bus, and ride a bus for 2 hours to get to hairdressing class at the Barbara Ford Peace Center every day. And she said, I turned around and went home again at 8 o'clock, and then get up at 4 in the morning to start all over again. And not a word of complaint. It was nothing but, I am so grateful to have this opportunity. And she also made friends with other kids from other villages that they never would have met. The lifelong friends, you could tell they just love being with each other. These teenagers, late teens, early 20s. And so I was sharing with Sister Ginny, I think there she is. And I said, I'm so impressed in hearing these kids' stories. It's unbelievable. And she said, yeah, but we have so much work to do. She said, we've given them the trade. She said, now my next thing is I'm writing grants to get money. She said, we need to help them use the trade or it's pointless, They open their own shops and work in Guatemala City and the restaurants and whatnot. And I said, I remember we were walking along. I was a step behind her because she's this ball of energy. I said, do you ever get discouraged? And she turned around and looked at me and went, discouraged? There's no time for that. She said, when one thing doesn't work out, you find another plan. And she just kept walking. And then she turned around again and said, I bet you're going to want to come back and do some art with my young people. And I was like, yes, sir. And it hasn't happened yet, but I would love to go back there and do art. Sister Thea Bowman, the earth is our mother. We come from her and we return to her. She's our home. When we destroy her, we destroy ourselves. Pope Francis, we must be bold enough to discover new signs and new symbols, new flesh to embody and communicate the word, and different forms of beauty, which are valued in various cultural settings. That's Our Lady Star of the Sea. Be creative in order to achieve peace. So right now at Art College, where I used to teach, Desales University, they have a thing going on, coining a word that Francis Desales coined back in the 1600s called unidiversity. He made it up himself to say that we're united in our diversity. That's the beauty of creation. We're all different from each other, but what makes us united is that we're all the children of God, And he wasn't even speaking, there probably weren't any black people in the French Alps, but so he was talking about any kind of diversity that we have. So our college, our community university, is starting this campaign here. So I designed this for T-shirts and coffee mugs and whatnot. And it's DeSales University, so the DS fit in there kind of nicely. But Pope Francis said a similar thing. What we need is unity in the richness of diversity. So 2 years ago, I was invited, I don't know if you're all familiar with the Los Angeles Religious Education Congress, the largest Catholic gathering in North America. Last year, there were 38,000 people there, I hear. But the day before it starts is Youth Day. And there's 13,000 teenagers descend on the Anaheim Convention Center, all sponsored by the Archdiocese of Los Angeles. And they have all kinds of things going on for youth on that day. And 2 years ago, I was invited to give 2 talks to the kids, the same talk twice. And I thought, they said it'll be about 200 kids each time. And I said, yeah, that sounded exciting. I'd never done it. Then the time got close, and I thought, what the hell was I thinking? 200 teenagers, what am I going to do with 200 teenagers? And so I did a talk on I showed multiculturally diverse images of Jesus and the saints, and 2 friends went with me to help. And then I handed out, and they led them through a guided meditation based on St. Teresa of Avila's prayer, Christ has no hands but yours, no eyes but yours, that lovely prayer. But to have 200 kids put their feet on the floor and close their eyes and get into it. And then we gave out crayons, and I handed out 5 different pictures, diverse images, and they colored for a half an hour, and you could have heard a pin drop. So 2 years in a row I did that, and then that's what I did with the Indianapolis kids, the National Catholic Youth. Same experience, dead quiet. Kids are so desperate, as adults are, it's just that they can't name it as much, to have those quiet, contemplative times. Now, these kids chose this as a workshop, so they wanted to be there, but they're the type of kid that I was when I was a teenager, that it's okay to be alone, that it's okay to there's nothing wrong with it. Now we have them in therapy, but it's really the mark of a creative person, somebody who's a little more contemplative. Nothing wrong with being an introvert, And so it was just a great experience, and I remember the one boy sitting in front of me. Well, I'll show you the 5 pictures first. Here's the Native American Jesus, a Holy Family, it's Asian, a Middle Eastern Jesus, an African Mary and child, and a Latino Joseph, San Jose with Jesus. And the boy sitting right in front of me was coloring St. Joseph's hair blue. And I said, oh, St. Joseph with blue hair. And he thought I was correcting him or something. And he said, you said we could do whatever we want. And I said, you can. I said, I'm thrilled. I never saw St. Joseph with blue hair. I think it's cool. And he said, can I show you something? And I said, sure. And he took out his phone and he said, my parents are from Bolivia. And he said, they took me there last summer. And on his phone, he had all these pictures of Madonna and Child, either paintings or statues that he saw in all the churches and cathedrals he visited with his parents. And I thought, what other 16-year-old kid would have that, an outlet for that kind of thing? And then my friends, Teresa and Mary, are walking around, and one of the boys looked up at Teresa and said, I never saw Jesus that looked like me before. And I thought, this is wonderful, and here I was dreading being with 200 teenagers. This is awesome work. And last year, every group of kids had an adult with them, of course, but several of the adults came up after and they said, this is perfect timing for these kids because they're all terrified. They're going to come home from school and find that their parents have been taken away because it's happening. And this was a year ago. It was already happening, that parents are being deported while their kids are at school. And they were living in absolute fear of that. So coloring for half an hour was a pretty nice way to spend time taking mind off your worries, So there they were. And that's my favorite. Dorothy Day said, if we could only learn that the only important thing is to love and that we will be judged on love, to keep on loving and showing that love and expressing that love over and over, whether we feel it or not, 70 times 7, not to do anything but love, love, love. Pope Francis, how wonderful it would be while we discover faraway planets to rediscover the needs of the brothers and sisters orbiting around us. Now, you may recall back in almost a year ago this time, 6 new planets were discovered in the farthest away galaxy that we know of. Do you remember that? It was on the news. But it was on the news, I forget what dastardly thing was happening in Washington that was dominating the news that night. And almost before the news was over, they said, oh, by the way, there's 6 new planets, And I thought, I wish you'd started the news show off with that bit, because I'd have a lot more hope in my heart now. But anyhow, about a month after that, they had the International TED Conference, TED, that talks, out in Vancouver. And so at one point they said, our next speaker is from Rome, and all of a sudden Pope Francis appeared. He had taped a TED conference. He Skyped it in, I think, actually. And for 18 minutes he gave a talk, and this was one of the lines, and he was referring to the discovery of these new planets, which he's thrilled about. But he said, let's not forget the people closer to home. These are the ones we have to worry about too. Thomas Merton said, no despair of ours can alter the reality of things or stain the joy of the cosmic dance, which is always there. Indeed, we are in the midst of it, and it is in the midst of us, for it beats in our very blood, whether we want it to or not. So this is Sacred Heart Church right across the streets where my studio is. And Father Doyle's been the pastor for 43 years. He's 83 years old now. He's from Ireland originally. He has changed the face of Camden in his devotion to social justice and the poor. He was a very close friend of Daniel Berrigan's and was arrested during the Vietnam War for burning draft cards, all that, So he's always been out there. And what he noticed, though, about 20 years ago, was that on the week of the winter solstice, the sun comes right down the main aisle of Sacred Heart Church and illuminates the altar, so it looks like it's glowing with light. This is at the exact same time that in Newgrange, Ireland, it's doing the same thing. If you're familiar with Newgrange, it's the #1 tourist attraction in all of Ireland. And it's an ancient pre-Christian Druid burial mound. It's huge, but on the summer solstice, there's a little hole over the front entrance, and the sun goes right through that hole and illuminates the center of the burial mound. And there's all these Celtic spiral carvings on the walls in there and everything. And this is 2,000 years before Christ. So they knew what they were doing. And then Father Doyle noticed this here. So it's a way to bring past, present, and future, lead us into the cosmos. And it's just the awesome week. He calls it Newgrange Week, and we have Mass right in the front door. No matter how cold it is, those front doors are open, and there we sit and have Mass. He sets up a little table for the altar and opens the door. So Camden is coming in, and all that light's going out, and it's ancient and new and cosmic and local, and it's just a beautiful spiritual event. The Creator is the ultimate source of everything, the loving and self-communicating foundation of all that exists. This is from Laudato Si. And this is a picture I did last summer at the Grunwald Guild when I took Carla's Mandala class, when I was allowed back in. And we had the very first night, she said, go into the woods and find a symbol for your brokenness and one for your joy. And then she led us through something. I did a separate mandala from this, but I was done before everybody else. So with my extra supplies and all, I created this. And I showed it to my dear friend Karen, who's a devout Lutheran, and she looked at it and she said, that's a monstrance. I said, you just gave me the title. I wasn't even thinking of it as a monstrance, and there it is. It's my brokenness is that crutch-like stick or tree driftwood that I found in the forest, and a daisy, of course, that could be a star or the sun or any of those things, you know. It's cosmic. So that's the title of it, The Cosmic Monstrance. And I did this one in that class as well. The Son, his reflection through whom all things were created, united himself to this earth when he was formed in the womb of Mary. The Spirit, the infinite bond of love, is intimately present at the very heart of the universe, inspiring and bringing new pathways. So this is the view out my bedroom window in Camden, which I've painted many times in many ways, and this is called Camden Wildlife. And then this past year I did this one. God is length, width, height, and depth. St. Bernard of Clairvaux said that. And that's the view looking the other way out my window. That Chinese restaurant down there and an old church. But this is called Cosmic Camden. And that same cosmos that's over us up here in New England, and it's right there over Camden too, and it's the whole universe. So here's the cosmic sacred heart. And it is you, I now realize, that my fellow humans, even those who do not believe, sense and seek throughout the magic immensities of the cosmos. Teilhard de Chardin. Someday, after mastering the winds, the waves, the tides, and gravity, we will harness for God the energies of love. And then, for the second time, humankind will have discovered fire. And the end of Laudato Si says, in union with all creatures, we journey through this land, seeking God. Let us sing as we go. Amen. That's all I have to say. Thanks. We have time, which should we just go right ahead? Okay. I have to ask my babysitter. We have time for a Q&A if anybody has any questions or concerns. Yes. Oh, we have a microphone coming your way.
I noticed that there is a religious woman advertising in the National Catholic Reporter to try to get Teilhard de Chardin declared a doctor of the church.
Oh, Ilia de Leo, I think.
Is it being taken up? Do you know? Have you heard?
No. Next. No, I just read that recently too. And because there's nothing to say a doctor of the church has to be a canonized saint. So I think it'd be real interesting. What I love about that, I'm just finishing a book, reading a book called Silence Speaks. And it's looking at 5 people who were silenced by the church, who are now like, and Merton was one who was silenced, and Teilhard, John Courtney Murray, Eve Congar, and who's the 5th one? But John Courtney Murray was silenced because he wasn't allowed to publish or speak because he was a big promoter of ecumenism in the 30s and 40s before anybody was ready to hear that. And then he was a big voice at Vatican II. They called him in as a consultant to talk about ecumenism. So that's a nutsy church, you know. When I was a novice, I remember, or no, it was after that, it was in the 80s, but they were picking on Anthony de Mello, the Indian Jesuit, who I loved, but he was he wasn't officially silenced, but it was very clear you were not to read his books, He was called into Cardinal Ratzinger at the time. And so what did that make somebody like me? I went out and bought every Anthony de Mello book I could find because I thought, they don't want me to know something. I wonder what it is. And it's always so complicated. The average person doesn't, I don't know. But again, it's about fear, the fear of change and the new. And when you're trapped in fear, you can't move forward. That's it. So now all these people are, all these ones that were silenced. Hildegard of Bingen was excommunicated before her death. And she wasn't even a saint officially because she was reinstated shortly before she died. So, but people thought of her as a saint. They called her Saint Hildegard, but she was never officially canonized. Lo and behold, 7 years ago, Pope Benedict decides to make her a doctor of the church. And they were like, well, she was never canonized. So he had what's called an equivalent canonization, which basically means I'm the Pope, I can canonize anybody I want. And I don't need all the miracles and all that. So that's how he canonized John the 23rd, too. So anyhow, I don't know if that answers your question, but I hope that'd be wonderful if Teilhard becomes a doctor.
Did you choose the city of Camden, or did Camden choose you?
Well, that's a very good question. And it's both. Because what happened was our community, the Oblates, was asked to become the rectors of the cathedral, which is unusual. But Bishop Galante, our bishop at the time, couldn't find asses and guys who wanted to live in Camden. Plus, they had to be Spanish speakers. That was part of the job. So 2 friends of mine took over that job, and I would go there for Sunday Mass. I was living in Philly at the time, and they were always saying, "Oh, you got to move in with us." And I'm like, growing up in Philly, Camden was the place you lock your doors and drive as fast as you can, right? And but meanwhile, Father Doyle approached me, and he gave me a little tour of the things he's doing down Sacred Heart, and he said, "If you would ever think of moving your studio here," he said, "I will provide you with a space." And so, seeing this tour, and he showed me an old corner bar they had turned into a theater, live theater, the South Camden Theater Company that he formed. I thought, this is not your run-of-the-mill parish, and a black Madonna statue and a black Sacred Heart that he commissioned and all this. And he said, why I would want you here is, he said, it's about beauty. He said that beauty brings hope to the challenged spots of our world like this. And he said there would be no expectations of you for the parish. He said, I can just see you in your studio and all that beauty filtering out through the neighborhood. He said, beauty's all, and I said, I was working on my Dorothy Day book at the time, and I said, well, you sound like Dorothy Day. That was her life motto, beauty will save the world. And he said, she was a good lady. Very understated. And so I said yes on the spot. And so I wasn't looking, but I was open to receiving, I'll put it that way, So there's a little bit of both going on. But I believe if you're where you're planted, that you're going to be happy. If you ever told me I'd be as happy as I am in Camden, I would have thought you were crazy 8 years ago or 9 years ago, But if you're doing what God put you on earth to do, what else matters, As I say, I don't care you get past caring what other people think about you. That's the biggest hurdle for so many people. Thea Bowman always said that. What's what she meant when she'd say, remember who you are and whose you are, and stop giving so much over to what other people think about you. That if you're doing you're using the gifts God gave you, then what's it care? What do I care what you think, That sounds arrogant, but it's not. If you don't like me, I'm not working hard at making it. And guess what? I probably don't like you either. I will love and respect you because I'm Christian, but I don't have to like, there's all that. And don't give me your political opinions on Facebook. I don't care, That's just not what this. And that happened after the Puerto Rican, the hurricane in Puerto Rico. Our parish in Camden is mostly Puerto Rican people. And I posted a painting I did for our cathedral of Our Lady of Providencia, the Puerto Rican Madonna. And I said, let us pray to Our Lady for help. I said, many of our parishioners haven't heard from their families. They don't know what's going on down there, so there's a lot of anxiety. And somebody wrote in, "Oh, fake news. I'm tired of all this fake news going around." And you don't engage these people. There's no reason going there. But I just thought afterwards, she's just mad because Our Lady of Providencia wasn't just going to throw paper towels at these people. Next, any other?
I had a question about your artistry.
What's that?
Back here about your artistry. Which mediums do
Artistry? Like I'm odd?
art? That's my Boston accent.
Oh, that's right. You're from Boston.
Your artistry. What mediums do you use? I've noticed you have a few things. I wasn't sure if you use acrylics. I noticed like maybe some watercolors. And do you do your own calligraphy?
Yes.
Oh, okay. Yeah, sorry.
This particular one is, I went to New Mexico years ago, and when I'm on my trips, I always sketch in black and white, and then when I get home, add the paint. So it's acrylic paint on there, and everything you saw that was painting on canvas is acrylic. But lately, most of what you saw today was on my iPad.
Which program do you use?
Sketchbook Pro is my favorite.
Okay. And is most of your artwork currently done on Sketchbook Pro, or do you still work with your acrylics?
Probably more on Sketchbook Pro now because I travel so much, so I can sit on. I did three of the things you saw, the three Bowman quotes I did on the plane here the other day, or after landing. So, and that's why I love it. It's just it's like a studio in the air. I can go into my little zone there. And then I just hit the button and send it to wherever it needs to go. But to me, it's just another medium. It's not a favorite medium. It's just a convenient medium. And it doesn't go quicker than, often I'll be in the middle of a project. Some of these take months, and so many layers and all that. And I often think if I had real paint, I would have been done this ages ago. So it's not a time thing. It's just a convenience thing, I guess, more than anything.
Great, thank you.
Uh-huh.
I have a question about your colors. Do you create them, make them? They're just so beautiful.
Make them as in like grind up pigment and all that?
Well, I don't know, they're just beautiful.
No.
Oh,
I mean, I don't know. I just use, I go to the art store and buy a tube of paint, a color I like, and that's all. I don't mean to sound snarky. But it is, I think I am a color. I lived with a priest once who said to me, back when I was teaching, "Ooh, you're not afraid of color, are you?" He was talking about a sweater I was wearing at the time, not my paintings, but my paintings do reflect that. And people always ask, have you been to the Central America or Guatemala, because of the color. So color is to art what emotions are, and line and structure are the left brain, the geometry of it. So you put, everybody's going to have their different emphasis. So mine's always been color. Oh, you have it.
Hi. Could you speak a little more about that trip where you went to see the Black Madonna of Montserrat? You went to Nice. Is it a trip that you do?
Yeah, every September I lead trips. I won't do that particular one again, I guess. I try to make them different each year. Last year we went to Ireland. And this coming September, that's a good lead-in. I almost feel like I paid you for this advertisement. This September is, we're going to Annecy, France, the home of Francis Desales. It's in the French Alps, one of the prettiest places you ever want to see in your life, near Geneva. People will probably fly into Geneva, Switzerland. It's right over. He was the Bishop of Geneva, but it was the Calvinist stronghold, and he wasn't allowed. Catholics were forbidden from even walking the streets of Geneva in his day. So you used to have to wear disguises to visit the hidden Catholics that were there. But in any event, so we're going there, and it used to be called the Venice of the Alps, because there's little canals running through, and we're going to walk through a glacier tunnel, an ice cave, and Mont Blanc is right there, the highest peak in Europe. But then after 4 days there, we're going to Paris and look at Notre Dame Cathedral and all the architecture, because my tours are, we call them Art of the Spirit tours, they're art and faith. So, and I start each morning with a 45-minute talk like we just did today. I have a little slide projector, and I start each morning off with a talk related to whatever we're going to see that day. And then we have fun. Yes, and I think it's September 24th, I believe, is the first date, and it's going to be 10 days or 8 days.
Thank you very much.
Thank you for, yeah.
Thanks,
Thank
Mother
you.
Vicki.